In today's video for the Cadillac 472-500, I'm going to talk about thermostat housings. And I know that sounds like kind of a basic thing, and it is. And it really comes up more as a problem when you're swapping stuff around, either doing a different drive on the front maybe, or going into a different sort of vehicle, or you want it to look better. So the factory is just this metal. Some of them are heavy metal like this. I've actually seen a couple of cast iron ones from like 68, 69, but it looked just like this. It just happened to be cast iron. And the housing just bolts over on top of the thermostat. Now, part of my problem with these, and one of the things I don't like, is you'll notice this is square. And so when you put it on, it with a high flow thermostat, it kind of blocks the thermostat from really flowing well out of the housing. It's not horrid, it will work, but you're really not gaining a lot with a high flow thermostat. So in a lot of ways, if you're going to run the factory stamped piece, then you probably want to run a regular factory thermostat. So early on, I decided to try and do something different. And the first thing I came up with is this. And I was running that on this motor, Make It Run motor, on the run stand. I had it all hooked up. Didn't leak at all. I've used it for years. This is a basic Chevy chromy straight up thermostat housing. And I had to modify it a little bit. If you look, the holes are oblonged to the inside. Chevy is a wider bolt pattern and it's a bigger bolt. Cadillac is a 5/16 bolt, Chevy is a 3/8 bolt, and the distance from hole to hole on a Chevy is wider. But the thermostat is the same diameter. So this seal area, this one takes a O-ring, the seal area is identical. So this is, like I said, a basic chromie, and I just took a rat tail file and oblonged the holes a little bit until it bolted onto the block, and that gave me this bubble to help with the flow around the thermostat so that I could ensure I got the total amount of flow that I wanted out of that thermostat. And that's where I started, but that was 30 years ago. That's been around a long time. Now, when you get into swapping, one of the problems is you might need something that's a different angle. You might need something that's a 90 or a 45 or something like that. It could even be something, this one's missing the bottom plate, but something at a slightly different angle or going a different direction. Maybe you're putting it into a street rod with a top hose that you got to go to. So the problem is this is a Chevy one, and if you look, the bolt holes don't line up. And it really would be a little tough. You could elongate it, but if you look, the bracket is hitting the intake here. So you really don't have a lot of room to do that. Now, the one that MTS sells is something I designed a long time ago. Now, this is a cheapy aluminum Chevy one. But if you look at this, the ring comes off. And so what I told MTS is if they just made a new ring and used the cast angled part, they could have all those choices in Chevrolet. And then they just add a new ring. So that's all they've done over all these years, is they just CNC up a new ring for the standard thermostat housing. And then, like I said, these are Chevrolet, but they come in all sorts of different angles, even straight up. Now, that made it easy. That's why if you ever look at a picture of the MTS thermostat, the base looks like it's a little different than the rest of the piece. These are just cheapy Spectre at the time. I'm not sure they're going still by that name, but thermostat housings. So the only problem is, like on this straight one, which is kind of like the Cadillac, is again, it hits the intake, but it doesn't have that bottom piece. So if I was trying to run something like this, then I'd have to do an adapter to try and spread the bolt pattern and turn it slightly. And that's what this does. And that's just something I made up in order to have another option available. It's not made by anybody else, but it's pretty simple, flat plate. I mean, if you're good with a drill press, you could probably pull off one of these little adapter plates in order to be able to run the Chevrolet housing. I'm not exactly sure why you'd want to do that. It was just an idea I had at the time I wanted to explore. So the next question is, what else would work? I mean, is there something else that has this bolt pattern? And the first answer is yes. That is a Pontiac billet thermostat housing. And that has the same bolt pattern. I don't know if you can see down in there, but that has the same bolt pattern and the same distance as the Cadillac one. And this is a full swivel for the Pontiac, O-ring seal, so just like the Chevy ones, and that gives you what you need. Now, one of the interesting things, if this is not the right angle for what you're doing, it'll get expensive unless you run across one of these cheap somewhere, and you might. But one of the interesting things is these rings are pretty much all the same. So if that particular one wasn't the right angle, you might be able to get a Chevy one and get the ring and make it do what you want it to do. And that would work. I mean, that is an option. But you're buying two thermostat housings, and even though the Chevy one's not that expensive, I mean, it might be a $20 housing. You know, the Pontiac one's probably a $30-something housing. So you're going to have some change into it. But that is an option, just something else to show you. Now, the other thing that's close, and it's the same bolt pattern, but not quite the same bolt size, is this is LS. And it has that little bubble. It's straight up. The bolt patterns are correct. It clears the intake. So it has a lot of things going for it. Now, the bolt holes are like 8 millimeter. So, because we got to remember, it's LS, so everything's metric. We need 5/16. So you got to ever so slightly drill out these holes, and you might even have to countersink this better, or if you're using a little Allen, you might have to take the Allen to a belt sander or something and reduce the head size just a little bit so it fits down in the hole. Now, the reason I don't bring this one up very often is one of the problems with LS is the thermostat is different. So you've got this step underneath that doesn't have an O-ring to seal like the Chevy ones. You know, the bolt pattern's correct, but now you're kind of fighting the seal underneath. Now, you could probably fill this with something, even a decent RTV that gets pretty hard, and make it work, or find a nice square O-ring, which I have looked for. That's not readily available, but it is something to think about if you're trying to make it look better. But it's going to take some work. You're going to take some fussing around to make sure that it seals here on the block. So the last thing I want to talk about that I've been exploring, and this was just a bit of an idea, was sometimes we're having trouble getting the special thermostat. This is a high flow thermostat, but remember they have that foot on the bottom to block off the bypass. So one of the thoughts I had when I was looking at the LS housing was, what could I do? And this is an LS thermostat. And it has a foot on the bottom too. Now these come in a couple of different types. I forget which year. This is either early or late, but it's the longer one of the two. The other one is a little shorter. But what I did here, just as an idea, and I haven't even tested this yet, it was just an idea at the time, was I made the spacer so the thermostat fits down in, and the height here is just correct so that the bypass will block the bypass hole down in the block like it's supposed to. And then this bolts up as an adapter, and the thermostat, sorry, trying to get everything square, and the thermostat drops in, and it gives it, I mean, it's sitting up a little bit, and that can be a problem if you have an air conditioner sitting here. Like I said, this is just an idea. That sits it up enough that the bypass part works correctly, and it's a modern thermostat, and they're easier to get. They're available everywhere these days. I also added a heater hose connection to it just because I could. And like I said, if you look over here, certainly the air conditioning thing could be a bit of a problem. But it was still just an idea. I thought I would share it with you. It was an interesting thing that I don't know if I'll try it or not, but it was an interesting idea. So anyway, that's a basic on thermostat housings. Like I said, the one that really fits is Pontiac, and that has the correct bottom to fit on and the correct ring to line up, and that gets everything to work, because if you look at the ring here, that gets everything to work just like the factory one, and you're good to go. So that's the one you probably want if you're okay with it going off to the side. If you need it straight up and down, you might have to do something else. The only other thing that I did was years and years ago is I initially made my own. This is completely machined out of billet, and I just made one to work the way I want it, and it was still straight up like factory, and it was the correct size, but it had a bit more of an open area for the thermostat. And that's what I did to make a nicer version of the first one I did, which I said was Chevrolet. Now, this will work. It's just, it's a little simple. It's a little, I called it jicky in one of the other movies, other videos. But, you know, it does work, and I've done that. I did that for years. So those are kind of your options out there. Part of the reason I brought this up is I've been told lately that trying to find these is getting a little hard. Dorman used to make a direct replacement, and I hadn't realized until recently that that's been discontinued. And so you got to find the good used ones. And a lot of places, you know, the motors are 50 years old. These are just steel. I mean, you can see even this one was corroding before I cleaned it up. And some of them are corroded completely out. And so it's somewhat hard to find. So there are a few other options, some of which may cost you a little more money than you want to spend. But that's something to know about and something to look at if you're having a problem in a swap and you need the hose to go a different direction. So anyway, that was just a quickie on thermostat housings. Talk to you later. Bye.